today I'm with Linda Zimmerman, who's a former research scientist, and Linda began paranormal investigations over 25 years ago. And she's now the award-winning author of over 30 books, including America's Historic Haunts and 13 volumes of the Ghost Investigator series of books highlighting her best cases. That's an awful lot of books, Linda. That really is.
Yes, it is.
You're busy, haven't you? So she's also appeared on television shows such as The Dead Files, Creepy Canada, America's Most Haunted, Paranormal Survivor, and Hotel Paranormal. And her areas of interest are personally experiencing haunted locations through her investigations and research. So welcome, Linda.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
I have some interesting cases to talk about, and I have some slides to show. Yeah, so I have been investigating haunted sites. I'm in my third decade now, and every case is different. It's just been an amazing ghost hunting career, paranormal career, whatever you want to call it. Nothing I thought I would do with my life, but I would be lecturing about local history and folklore, and people started asking about ghost stories. And I realized the best way to tell a ghost story is to try to experience the paranormal activity. So I have some of my favorite cases I'll be going over. And if there's any questions, people can jump in and let me know. So this case I call You Can Run, But You Can't Hide. There's a house in Sussex, New Jersey. It was built in the 1840s as a bunk house for local farmhands. And even back then, it was known to be haunted. People would run out in the middle of the night. The current owners bought the house in the 1960s, the Wershing family. And they, the poor kids on many nights would climb out of their second story windows onto the roof of the porch and then shimmy down and run to a neighbor's house rather than spend the night in this house. I don't know how they could grow up here. Full-bodied apparitions, footsteps. But one of the creepiest things, this doll, when the Wershing's granddaughter was at a county fair, they had a beauty contest at the county fair, and she won the contest, and as her prize, they made a doll that looked like her, put it in a dress like her. So they had this doll on this table in a little parlor for many, many years. The granddaughter grew up, was going to college out in New Mexico. And one morning, Mrs. Wershing went into this room and the doll was lying on the floor. And she thought, well, that's strange. This doll hasn't moved in a decade. So she just picked it up and put it back. And a short time later, the phone rings and it's the college where her granddaughter's going. And they said, well, your granddaughter is okay, but there's been an accident. They were removing asbestos from one of the buildings, and you can't let those fibers get into the air. So they had the building under negative pressure and didn't have a warning sign. So as the granddaughter was opening this heavy metal door, the negative pressure pulled it closed, and it closed on her hand and severed her index finger. Mrs. Wershing, once she got over the shock, she remembered the doll. She ran back into the room, and if you can see right where the right index finger of the doll should be, it was missing. She was never able to find that finger. And she's not sure if, there was like a 3-hour time difference with the college. She's not sure if the accident with her granddaughter occurred first and then the doll fell down, or vice versa. But this, I didn't even like standing in front of this doll taking the photo. This is so far beyond coincidence. And this is just one of the many things that happen in this house. Part of the problem is that Mr. Wershing kind of fancied himself something of an Indiana Jones type. And he would go around to local Native American burial sites and dig up the bones and artifacts and bring them home. Not a good idea, and not at all legal, I should add. Well, one night after he had robbed a particular grave, he went away on business, and Mrs. Wershing is asleep in this room, and she wakes up in the middle of the night. The room is icy cold, and she feels something lying up against her. It feels hot. It feels hairy. It almost feels like a dog, and she can feel this heavy breathing, and it starts scratching her. She jumps up, goes to run out of the room, but stops for a moment because she wants to see if she can see what this is. And when she turns around, she doesn't see anything, but she hears this really deep voice say, "Found you." You can imagine when Mr. Wershing got home, she said, "You get every bone, everything, and out of here and rebury it." And even with that, they had to get an exorcist in the house to clear out whatever it was. So this should be self-evident, but don't disturb graves, rob their contents, and bring them into your house. It is definitely not a good idea. Another thing you probably shouldn't bring to your house. This is a place in Wappinger Falls, New York. And this woman was at a local cemetery putting some flowers on a grave, and there was this pair of the very nice wrought iron gates. She put a note on them. If you don't, they were laying in the back, and she said, "If you don't want them anymore, I'll take them." Well, these were the former gates to the cemetery, and she had them installed at the end of her driveway. And the night she did, she is lying in bed. She's living all alone. She hears very heavy footsteps coming up the stairs to her bedroom door. The door doesn't open, but something grabs her by the back of the neck and is thrashing her around the bed. And just as fast as it came, it was gone. The next morning she calls a friend. She's hysterical, and she said, "You just had a bad dream." But the friend comes over and looks at the back of her neck, and there were all these big red welts, scratch marks. So what most people would have done is get rid of the gates. But she thought that whatever she had brought home with these gates would be trapped there if she got rid of them. Well, year after year, more and more activity in the house, upstairs, downstairs, the yard. I did a show called Creepy Canada, and apparently they ran out of Creepy Canada locations because they started shooting in America. And here I am with an EMF meter between the gates, and you can see the camera crew is filming it. And for whatever reason, there was very high EMF fields between the gates, and the farther you'd walk up the driveway, the lower the EMF would go down. So there was no electrical source plugged into these gates. So it was very unusual. And then we are filming in infrared in the garage, and I gave my usual, "If there's anything here, would it give us a sign?" And you can see I'm holding one of these long 3-pronged gardening tools. And this thing came flying off a shelf and hit the ground. Very dramatic moment, but even more dramatic. You can see I'm looking rather concerned here because I thought I was standing all alone and somebody tapped on my shoulder. And I turned around. I thought it was the sound guy or something wanting to get my attention. I end up turning completely around because nobody's anywhere near me. And you can see I'm asking everybody. I'm looking a little concerned. I'm not panicked, but did somebody just tap me on the shoulder? It was a very disconcerting moment because it's one thing to hear something fall or hear footsteps, but when you get touched, it wasn't threatening. It was basically, you asked for a sign, here we are. So, yeah, the cemetery gates are still there. They are trying to sell the house, and I'm sure that was the last I heard. I'm sure someone who wants to buy a haunted house will pay top dollar for it. I couldn't live there. There's enough problems in the world without inviting a cemetery gates full of spirits into your house. This is Rolling Hills Asylum. This is in northern New York State, almost near the Great Lakes. And this is just this top picture here is one of the buildings. You can see the whole complex. This started out as an orphanage or a place for people who were poor, and it grew to house tuberculosis patients, the criminally insane, the elderly, orphans, unwed mothers, and there were basically all in the same rooms. It was just horrific. So you can imagine what went on here. And we went to investigate this 54,000 square foot asylum one evening, which is now empty. And the worst thing, that there was a lot that happened, but this was the second floor east wing. And I was with a friend of mine who's a police officer and his brother. And if you walk all the way down to the end of this hall, each wing has a little sunroom, a little solarium at the end. So we are in that solarium and we start hearing all this banging noise in the hallway. And we think, great, we have to walk back through that hallway. But that's what we're there for, to experience the activity. So as we're walking back, I didn't realize I was getting a little ahead of my friend and his brother. So I'm probably about 10 feet out ahead of them. Now, this is a flash photo. We are in pitch darkness here in this old asylum. And I did not see anything, but I felt a very strong male presence literally rush. I could almost feel the wind of it rushing out the door at me. And it just felt like a very personal attack. And it felt like it was targeting me because I was a woman. And I just had to get out of that wing. I hurried, and once I got out of the big double doors, fortunately that feeling passed. But it was one of the top 2 or 3 disconcerting encounters I'd had over the 25 years. The owner of the property was in her office, and she would stay there over the night when people were there to investigate. So I didn't want to tell her what happened, but I went to find her and I said, could you tell me what's the common occurrences, experiences in the second floor east wing? And she rolled her eyes and she said, oh, that place. She said, women always feel attacked. So I said, well, you can add my name to that list there. Again, it's the personal experiences. It's when you are physically and emotionally targeted. And I always say death doesn't improve one's personality. And I get the distinct impression that this might have been one of the criminally insane who liked to prey upon women. And if you ever come to this country, you can rent this place for the night if you want to experience it for yourself. That moment in the asylum was about as close as I've ever come. That was terrifying. But after a while, it got me angry that this entity had gotten to me. So I actually went back a few months later and I opened the door to that wing and I said, I know you're in there. You're not getting me this time. And it was kind of an absurd scene when you think of it. But I was not happy that this thing was trying to target women, and the experience didn't continue. So there are absolutely moments of sheer terror. But I decided very early on, if I ran every time I was scared, I would not get anywhere. So perhaps it's a lack of judgment on my part, or stubbornness. But I keep at it. So this is the Ulster County Jail, which was a small, mid-sized jail in about an hour north, about 2 hours north of New York City, in a quiet town area. And I was contacted by one of the guards who worked many years there and told me how haunted this place was. And they had to abandon it and move to a bigger facility. So it was available for us to investigate. But some of the stories, here's one of the cell blocks. He said that many of the corrections officers would see figures floating or moving near the ceiling, almost as if they were walking, but not in this particular building. I've seen this and heard this in other places where spirits seem to be walking through a wall, and then they find out when the house was originally built, there was a doorway there. It's like they have the memory of the old structure. So for whatever reason, they would see these figures floating along the ceiling. In this particular room, black football shaped American football with little points at each end, objects several feet wide would come in and out of the walls here. I can't imagine trying to sleep in this room. The corrections officers were seeing it. All the inmates were seeing it. As if it isn't bad enough to be in jail, you're in a haunted jail. I like to set up audio recorders in different locations and then leave the area so that if anything is on the audio, I know it wasn't one of us sneezing or whispering. So at this location, I had put one of my digital audio recorders. And if you have ever done a paranormal investigation, you know you go home and you have hours and hours of audio and video, and it's kind of like watching paint dry if nothing is happening. So I'm sitting in my office listening to this particular audio. I think I was probably nodding off a little. And then all of a sudden I hear this voice say, Sarah. And I jumped up and did I just fall asleep and dream that? But I played it back. And sure enough, it sounded like this deep, whispery voice saying Sarah. Now, this is on my website, so you can go and listen to it. It's rather chilling. So this was a men's cell block, and I'm thinking, why is this name Sarah being spoken? So I contacted the man who had originally got us into the prison for the investigation, Hank, and I said, again, I didn't tell him what I heard. I said, Hank, I'm sending you an audio clip. Tell me if you hear anything. He calls me back in 60 seconds. Who's Sarah? I don't know. That's what I was hoping you could tell me. So it was a couple of weeks later that Hank calls me back and he said, are you sitting down? He spoke to one of the corrections officers who worked there back in 1971. And he played the sound and he said, oh, I know who Sarah is. And unfortunately, it's a terrible story. But one day, this man who was in the cell block asked to call his wife. So this officer brought the man to the phone to call his wife. And the whole conversation was, please ask Sarah to forgive me. I'm so sorry what I did to Sarah. This man was abusing his own daughter. Just horrible. So he had been arrested for that. And he's begging his wife for forgiveness from Sarah. He goes back to his cell. The guard said, he had this strange look on his face. And 45 minutes later, they found out that he had hung himself in the cell, which is right to the left of where the audio recorder was put. So, if that is all a coincidence, that is the most remarkable of coincidences. I urge you, my website is www.gotozim.com. You can go to the Ghost Investigator section, and under the Ulster County Jail, I urge you to listen to that very creepy, whispery voice. This is used to be a stagecoach inn built in the early 1800s. It became a private home called the Patchett House because the Patchett family built it. One day, one of the Patchett descendants, who was an actual brain surgeon, was driving by, and in this window here, this big window on the side, he sees his Aunt Emma standing in the window waving at him. So he pulls over, kind of in a state of shock, because Aunt Emma had been dead for many, many years. I want to point out these doors, these cellar doors, the slanted doors there. Those were the doors that were used to bring the bodies in when this place was a funeral home. And in the basement, these are the embalming sinks, which are still there. An enormous amount of activity goes on in this place. Today, it is an art school, but you name the activity, it happens. But what happened to us? I love this picture. This is me in infrared with my alien glowing eyes. And you can see in my hand, I have an EMF meter that is all lit up because at about this moment, we're on the second floor. My friend, the police officer, and this incredibly talented psychic medium, Barbara, and I are all on the second floor. And we hear this huge banging, crashing sound. It sounded honestly like somebody picked up a couch and threw it. And Mike actually reached for his gun because he thought someone had broken in and was ransacking the place. So we went through every room in the house and nothing. Everything was locked up tight. But what we had in the basement was a trail camera. Um, I hope you've seen those cameras that hunters put on a tree, and when an animal passes by, it takes a series of photos. We had one of those in the basement near the embalming sinks. And at the time we were hearing this crashing sound, something tripped the camera. And you'll see there's a series of photos. You can see the date, the time, the temperature. This is the first photo. This is the second photo. Something dark has a hold of the camera. Here's the third photo. This was a big camera strapped to a tripod. So this wasn't like a moth landed on this. Something was shaking our trail camera. We tried duplicating this. If you were to put your bare hand in front of if you've ever used these infrared cameras, your hand looks bright white and you can see all the ridge lines of your fingerprints. We tried gloves. Gloves look white. We have not been able to reproduce this. So something was clearly not happy that we were there and did the banging, slamming sound. The psychic, Barbara, she saw earlier in the night this whitish figure that was trying to leave the embalming room but wasn't able to cross the threshold. And she also smelled gunpowder at the same time. In fact, we all smelled gunpowder. And she believes that this had been a murder victim, a gunshot victim, who is still trapped in the room where his body was brought and he was embalmed. I have a whole series of procedures, protection techniques. I do clearing techniques throughout the time that we're there. When I get home, I physically throw all of my clothes in the wash, get in the shower, do more techniques. And I also don't try to open myself up. You know, some people you'll see on these shows, I open myself for all the spirits here. No, no, definitely don't do that. But even with all that, there was one case we did. It was a particularly nasty haunting, and I had a feeling something came home with me, and that that day we had a plumbing problem. And so I had to get a plumber here, and I'm in the basement with the plumber, and we hear these heavy footsteps above us on the first floor, and I'm trying to ignore it because I know it's not a person. And the plumber grabs his wrench. He goes, "Aren't you alone in the house?" I said, "Yeah, I'm alone." He goes, "Well, somebody's there." He runs upstairs with his wrench, and he was not happy that no one was there. And he said, "Did you hear that?" I'm trying to say it's the floorboards. And then we heard it again. And we have never been able to get that plumber to come back into the house. And I had to do a lot more clearing techniques and saging and smudging. So I try not to bring anything home, but you know, you also get very emotionally involved in these cases. You empathize with the spirits, you know, many times. I hate to see them trapped in those locations, and you know, you start showing empathy, you may get an attachment. So but here is one of the I call it the most in your face activity I've ever encountered. Several years after I started this, people started contacting me and saying, you know, when you were here, did you perform any clearing or anything like that? And I'm like, no, why? And they said, well, shortly after you were here, within weeks or months, the activity stopped and hasn't continued. And I couldn't figure that out for the longest time. But what I do after a case, I write about it and I talk about it. And I began to wonder if a lot of these hauntings are the result of uh, something unresolved. They are trying to get a message across, something that traumatic that happened in their life, some sort of emotional hook keeping them there, and they want to tell the world of the living their story. And when I can, that's what I'm doing. So I don't know if that's what's triggering it. But I would say about a third of my cases, and there have been hundreds, that the homeowners will then tell me at some point the activity has either greatly diminished or has gone away. And as I say, it's not anything I think I'm doing other than they want to be heard and I'm listening and then telling their story. So this lovely home was just a summer home for a wealthy financier, and it's in eastern Pennsylvania. It's called the Columns for obvious reason. It's today a historical museum, but the curator and board of directors here has had a lot of activity, so they gave us the key and the code. Talk about a night in the museum. They said, "Go ahead, it's all yours." So we walked in a side door on the left here, and as soon as we walked in, I just got the very vivid impression of this woman with kind of Victorian style clothing with puffy sleeves and upswept hair. And we haven't even walked two feet in, and I said to my friend Mike, I said, "Oh, we are in for it tonight." I said, "There's a very active woman spirit here." The claim to fame to this museum, if you are familiar with the assassination of Abraham Lincoln in Ford's Theater, when he was shot, one of the people there pulled the flag up. There was a large flag draped over the presidential box, and they bunched it up and put it under his head as a pillow. And if you can see these dark stains on the stripes here, those are the actual blood stains from Abraham Lincoln the night he was assassinated. Now, nobody's seen Lincoln here, but I'm sure this type of energy doesn't help the rest of the house. This may look like a torture device, but it is actually a hair curling machine. Yes. I don't know if you can see the picture of the very distressed woman sitting in the chair there. I don't know how large your screen is, but she's all hooked up to these things, which I guess was supposed to give you really tight curls. So I'm standing in this doorway taking this photo. Mike is down the hallway. Again, we're the only ones in the building. And as I'm telling him, you have to see this hair curling machine, I was wearing a baseball cap. I felt a finger go up the back of the cap and wiggle back and forth in my hair. And I just absolutely froze. And Mike's like, "What's the matter? You're not moving." I said, "Did I back into a coat rack or a plant stand? What did I back into?" He said, "There's an open doorway behind you." He said, "There's nothing there." And fortunately, the feeling stopped. But I felt it was that woman again. And I told him, I said, "She has just read me like a book. She knows who I am." I said, "I know this sounds bizarre, but she knows who I am." But Mike and I have been through so many haunted places. When one of us says something, the other one doesn't doubt it. So here I am with there I am with the baseball cap and some of my gear. I wear a vest so I can have all my gadgets in it. And I started to go up this stairway. And what I felt was that this woman stood at this balcony here, and I didn't want to get anywhere near her. And so this is the upstairs in daylight. You can see I just felt she stood right there. And I'm just transfixed with this woman, wondering what her story is, why she's there. Did she used to live there? And I'm staring at her where I felt she was. And then down below, I hear the swishing of the old time fabric, the skirts. You know, when a woman walked, there was there was this swishing sound. And so I jumped up, and Mike's like, "What's going on?" I said, "She wants me to follow her." I usually am very scientific in my investigations. This night, she had me hook, line, and sinker. I said, she wants me to follow her because she knows who I am and wants to prove it. So I run after the sound. Mike runs after me, and the sound goes into a back office with all these filing cabinets and everything. And I was so disappointed. I said, what is she going to do? Fax me? I was like, I'm so wrong. I'm just so wrong. And he says, well, maybe there's something in these filing cabinets, and look at them all. I said, I could spend years going through this. And he says, well, try. So I'm so focused. I open a drawer. I just pull out one of these files at random, and I'm crouched on the floor with my flashlight. And Mike, being the police officer, says, Linda, you look like a burglar. He said, you can actually sit in the chair here and we can turn on the light. So yeah, it didn't occur to me. So I was like, I'm flipping through, and I see some article that says something about ghosts. I'm like, oh, cool. And it says, check out this website, ghostinvestigator.com. And I'm like, wow, that's a really great name. And I'm like, wait a minute, that's my website. And Mike comes running over, and he's like, look at the bottom. So look at this article here. That's my website. And in the article, it talks about Linda Zimmerman, a paranormal expert, visiting the museum, blah, blah, blah. It was an article about me. In this, 10,000 articles, I follow a sound because I'm convinced this woman knows who I am, wants to prove it. I happen to pull out the one file folder that has an article with me in it. And if I was to write this as fiction, nobody would believe it. Fortunately, I have it all on tape as it was happening. And we know who this woman is now. This woman on the left here with the upswept hair and the puffy sleeves, her name is Juliet Peirce. Now, her husband, if you've ever heard of the philosophy of pragmatism, he was the man who developed that philosophy. She was devoted to him. He died about 20 years before she did, and she lived in mourning clothes for the rest of her life. She did not live in the Columns Museum building. She lived very close nearby, and when she died, all of her belongings were brought to the museum, including her mourning dress and her deck of tarot cards. This deck of cards, there was a lot of curiosity and mystery about her origins. She was from somewhere in Europe. She talked about playing with the Kaiser when he was a little boy. some people thought she might have been a gypsy. Nobody was sure if she was royalty or what, but the one thing everybody knew, she was extremely psychic, and she had this deck of tarot cards with which in her life she gave the most incredible readings. So you take an incredibly psychic, gifted woman, and when she passes away, I think you get this incredibly lucid, communicative spirit. There was nothing bad or harmful about her at all, except she came on a little strong. She wanted her story told, and I am apparently not the only one who has encountered her. As I was writing the story for this case, I got a call from the curator of the museum, and she said, I don't know if this is of interest to you. I hadn't told her what happened. She wanted to wait till I wrote about it. And she said, we had an open house the other day, and this woman kept staring up the staircase and finally came to me and said, you know, you have a woman who's standing at that balcony right there, and described the same woman. So she is a very, very strong spirit. And why she chooses to stay there, maybe she still has, she apparently had a sad life the last 2 decades. Once her husband died. And I have a feeling she just hasn't gotten over that overwhelming grief yet. And that's what keeps her locked to this world. I have two more quick ones. St. Augustine, Florida, which is one of the oldest cities in the country. And this is the Ripley's Believe It or Not Museum, which was a private home. It was a hotel. I could talk all day about this. Many, many murders took place here, deaths. And then you have objects like this in the building, which is extremely haunted. I sent this picture to my friend Barb, and she never wants to know anything. She just send me a picture and let me see what I get from this. So I sent her this picture from a museum exhibit, and she gets back to me and she goes, I'm sorry, I'm really letting you down. I'm like, well, what do you mean? She goes, I can't get anything from this. My throat keeps tightening up, and it's like I can't breathe every time I look at this. And I said, well, what do you think it is? She says, well, it's obviously just a cobbler's bench, a shoemaker's bench, but I don't know why I keep choking every time I look at it. And I kind of felt like a rat for springing this on her. But I said, no, that is not a shoemaker's bench. This is a garroting bench. The victim would sit on the bench, and if you can see, this part coming out here with the rope would be put around their neck, and then there would be a stick put in there, and it would be twisted to slowly execute the person. And if you look in the background, those are beheading knives. So you have a place which, I forgot to mention, the building was built on an Indian burial ground. There were murders in this building, and then you bring in objects of execution. And this I thought was an interesting thing here. This wooden boat on the mantle. This is a Sumatran soul boat. When somebody died, they would put the blood of the person in this boat and send the boat out. I don't know how Ripley got his hands on one of these. But again, there is so much energy of death in this building. It's remarkable. And you can go and ghost hunt here at night. They turn out all the lights, and you get the free range of the entire building. sounds, voices, apparitions, cold spots, you name it, everywhere. It's I call it the Disneyland of the paranormal because it is so wildly haunted. And one other thing in St. Augustine, this is a statue of St. Augustine, and the legend is that you can't take a flash photo of it because there's a dark spirit that gets in front of you. So I'm like, well, that's obviously people putting their thumb in front of the camera, whatever. So I took a flash photo and I said, see, there, you can take a flash photo. And I was like, all right, let me take another one. And this is what I got. And I was like, I can't explain it. It was a good camera. I didn't have my finger in front of it. And all I did was take two quick shots, same position, as you can see, same position. So I have no idea what that is. Last one. Yeah, we're ending on a cheery note here. The evil that men do. This is a house that was built in the 1960s in the town of Pomona, New York. Farms and orchards all around, and this was a somewhat modern structure for the time. And take a look at the couch, this unusual statue here, and these thin curtains over the windows. A couple was renting this house and they were breaking their lease and leaving because they would wake up in the middle of the night and this hunched over figure, black figure, would be staring down at them in bed. Footsteps, poltergeist activity of objects being smashed. And they were leaving in like a week or two. And I said, I'll be there tomorrow. So it's a very unnerving house. The man who lived there was not a nice person. We think he used to perform illegal operations there. I will leave it at that. And as I'm packing up my gear, it's dark. There's a very faint light coming through these curtains. This is a daylight photo. I'm there at night. And I see something moving from my right to left in front of the windows, and it's dark and it's blocking the light. And the woman's behind me, and I said, do you have a street light? And could a truck have just gone by and caused this unusual shadow effect? She said, no, we're very far from the road. There are no street lights. The light is mounted on the outside of the house. She said the only way for something to block the light is if it's in the room with you. So I took a quick breath, grabbed my infrared camera, started snapping pictures. So you have the lay of the room here. And in one of the infrared pictures I took, I got this. How did that happen? Oh, it's haunted here. Come on. Okay. So I have no idea what this is. Here you can see the curve of that statue, and here's the couch, and here are the windows with the faint light. And when I showed this photo to the homeowner, she said that's what they'd been seeing. Can you see it almost has it looks like a hunched back. I sent this original image to 3 different photo experts. I said, please tell me this is, just a glitch, and that nobody could explain it. They moved out. I feel sorry for whoever else moved in there. But this, in all of the years of doing this, this is the one photo I can always turn to and say, no, I have absolutely no explanation for this. I do have 2 other, I have lots of stories, but 2 other I definitely wanted to relate. And one of them is related to the psychic Barbara. Um, we were doing an investigation of a library of all places in the town of Nyack, New York. And it was maybe a 100-year-old library, nothing terribly old, but there was a lot of activity there. And the staff was slightly unnerved working there. But we are uh, doing our usual investigation. It's at night, and in the children's room, um, Barbara and I were there by ourselves, and she suddenly stops and has this strange look, and I know what that's all about. She's hearing something. And I said, "What is it?" And she says, it's an older woman. It's like, okay. And she said that she knows what you do. And I said, okay, this is sounding personal. And she said, and I keep hearing a song over and over. And I was like, all right, I'm intrigued. I wasn't particularly alarmed. I was like, someone has a message. And she looks right at me, and she said, she keeps singing the song, "Can the Circle Be Unbroken?" Well, it was like hitting me with a sledgehammer. I put up my hands. I'm like, no, 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 no. And I physically backed away. I was never so stunned, because what Barbara didn't know and couldn't know was that 3 days earlier, I went to the funeral of my mother-in-law, and it was a very sad affair. And at one point, everybody stood up and held hands, and the one song they played was "Can the Circle Be Unbroken?" I had never heard the song before, and it was, kind of upsetting. Everybody's crying, but the song just kept going on and on. And in my head, I'm thinking, how long does this damn song go? It just didn't seem to stop. Um, uh, but still, and then the song was over, and again, it was very sad. But here I am 3 days later in the children's room of a library, nowhere near where the funeral was. And my mother-in-law comes through Barb to tell me basically that she knew that I did these investigations. So she came to me because she wanted the family to know she was okay. And I still get broken up about that. And at first I hesitated to say anything to the family, because they're going to think, oh, here's this, our brother's crazy wife. Now what is she doing? But I said, no, this is incontrovertible. Once Barbara told me about that song, which she couldn't possibly have known. And you could just feel her presence. I told my husband, and he said, well, write something up and we'll send it to all of them. And it was so gratifying, because they were so comforted by it. They didn't ridicule. In fact, 2 of his sisters the next week made appointments with the psychic for readings, because they were that, there are moments in life that you just can't be skeptical any longer. And that for them, and for me, it was a very powerful moment, and I still think of it all the time. And probably still afraid my mother-in-law is watching me still. But so that had the psychic not been there, I was not getting that message myself. I can get messages sometimes, but she needed Barbara's amazing talents to get that definitive recognition through. So you never know where messages are going to come, and you have to be open to them. And when you do get a message like that, even if the person it's directed to is skeptical, you you really need to go out on a limb and say, look, you can think I'm crazy, but here's what happened, take it or leave it. And in this case, it was a transformative uh, uh, moment that really alleviated grief for many people.
That's an amazing story.
Yeah.
Yeah. And thank you
So
for sharing it.
yeah, that I'm covered in goosebumps right now just remembering that moment. It was a shock, but once it sunk in, I was very grateful to have received it.
Yeah. Do you get many orbs on your photos when you're photographing in these places?
Yes. When I switched from 35 millimeter way back when to digital, I started getting a lot of orbs. Some of them are clearly dust or rain, but I have gotten a couple that, again, are inexplicable. Um, and some of them we actually physically see. Barbara is very good at physically seeing orbs, and we'll take some photos and they'll be right where she said they were. So it's a touchy field, because some people believe all of them are dust and some people believe all of them are spirits. So I think every photo needs to be evaluated on its own.
And have your experiences clinched it for you that there is something beyond this life?
Many, many times over. Yes, absolutely. No doubt. And the one thing I think I've really learned is, do not live a life of regret, because when you dig into these stories, there's usually some sort of regret behind them. And just live your life, don't be mean to anyone, but live your life, do everything you wanted. I don't want to be that person on my deathbed said, oh, if I'd only done that, if I'd only done this. I want to be free and clear to move on to the next part of the adventure.
That we all. And did you find that when you started out your paranormal investigations, that you had some beliefs that you had to let go of, or some expectations, or predisposed ideas anyway about what you were doing, or because you would have evolved over the years?
Oh, I absolutely evolved from what am I doing, with having a pad and a paper and a cassette recorder and, my 35 millimeter, to how do I go about this? To thinking, there was this surge of everybody needs equipment to do all this. And, of course, I try to do it scientifically, because it's one thing to feel something, but if you can get something on a meter or an image or sound to back it up, that's my goal. And I've kind of come not completely full circle, but I started seeing these people who takes them 3 hours to set up their equipment, and then they, all night, and then, everything is scientific, and it's like, sit still and be quiet and listen and be part of the environment, be part of wherever you are. So many people pay so much attention to the equipment, they're not paying attention to the activity always. And, nobody calls me and said, my EMF meter was going off last night, can you come by? No, they say, I heard footsteps, I saw a figure of a child, this or that. They're experiencing things with their own six senses. So, I always have cameras and recorders and things going, but I try to be more present in the investigation now than before.
Yeah. Interesting.
Okay. Well, I hope I raised a few eyebrows there.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. You taking the time. I know it's going on to about 9:30 p.m. where you are now, so we'll let you go.
10:30 now.
10:30 is it? Oh, sorry. Oh my gosh, we've got the time from. So we have to let you go to bed.
Yes, and hopefully I have sweet dreams.
Yeah. Hopefully we all do.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. It's a subject I'm passionate about. So I'm always happy to share these experiences.
And thank you so much for taking the time, and so sorry about the technical issues in the beginning to everyone as well. Anyway, we'll have that fixed next time we have someone on. So thanks again, and it's been a real pleasure.
Take care.
Okay.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.